Welcome to our deep dive on cannabinoid pharmacology. We've got some fascinating research to unpack here, PhD-level stuff on cannabinoid signaling.
Yeah, it really dives deep into how those cannabinoids mess with your body, like at the molecule level.
It's amazing how these tiny molecules can have such a big impact, right?
For sure.
And to really understand how they work, we got to start with, well, the stars of the show.
Right, the superstars.
The CB1 and CB2 receptor.
Like the gatekeepers, you know?
Oh, I like that. Gatekeepers on the surface of our cells, deciding what gets in and out.
Exactly.
But before we get to the party happening inside the cell,
Okay.
we need to back up a bit. What exactly are receptors in the first place, and why should we care about them?
Well, think of receptors as the cell's communication system. They pick up signals outside the cell and pass on the message inside. It's like a chain reaction.
So they're like the cell's ears or eyes, always listening and reacting.
Yeah, precisely. And without them, our bodies wouldn't function, at all. Heart rate, emotions, everything relies on this communication.
Wow. These tiny things are responsible for so much. And I know that CB1 and CB2 receptors, they're part of a bigger family, right? The G protein-coupled receptors, the GPCRs.
You got it. GPCRs, massive family, hundreds of them, and they're involved in everything from smelling stuff to your blood pressure, even mood swings.
One family doing all that. So, are they all basically doing the same thing?
Well, they share this basic mechanism. Imagine a GPCR on the cell membrane. It's like a lock, just waiting for the right key, right? And then a signal comes along in the form of a molecule. If it fits, bam, it binds to the GPCR, activating it. That's called ligand binding.
Ah, so the ligand is like the key to that lock.
Exactly. And you've got different keys, different effects, depends how they interact with the lock. Now, with cannabinoid receptors, you've got two main categories of ligands.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me. What are these cannabinoid ligands?
First up, we've got the endogenous cannabinoids. Those are the ones your body makes naturally, like homegrown cannabinoids.
Our bodies make their own cannabinoids.
You do. The big names are anandamide and 2-AG.
Wow.
Yeah, back in the 90s, when they discovered these molecules, it blew everyone's minds, revolutionized how we understand the whole endocannabinoid system, showed us our bodies are actually wired for this stuff.
Wired for cannabinoids. That's wild. So we've got our internal team, anandamide, 2-AG, doing their thing. But what about the cannabinoids we get from, say, cannabis? Like THC, CBD.
Those are the exogenous cannabinoids coming from outside. They can also bind to those CB1 and CB2 receptors, just like the homegrown ones.
Okay, so we've got the internal crew and the external players all messing with these receptors. I'm guessing the effects depend on which receptor they actually bind to.
Bingo. Location, location, location. CB1 receptors, they love the brain and central nervous system, hang out in areas that deal with memory, mood, movement, pain, you name it.
Ah. That explains why THC gets you high, right? It's mainly hitting those CB1 receptors in the brain.
Exactly. Now, CB2 receptors, they're more into the immune system. Peripheral tissues, they're modulating inflammation, immune responses, that kind of stuff.
So that's why CBD is all about those anti-inflammatory properties, because it prefers CB2, right?
Yeah, that's the general idea. But got to remember, it's more nuanced than that. This whole receptor distribution thing, it's not black and white.
Science is always evolving.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got these cannabinoids binding to their receptors. It's like that key fitting in the lock. But what's actually happening inside the cell when that goes down?
That's where things get really interesting. We're talking cannabinoid signaling. It's a chain reaction, one event triggering another, leading to, the cell changing its behavior.
Okay, I'm ready for that chain reaction breakdown. What happens first?
First, you've got the binding, like we talked about. Cannabinoid molecule, it latches onto the CB1 or CB2 receptor. And, get this, that binding actually changes the receptor's shape.
Wait, the receptor changes shape, so it's more like a handshake that activates it.
Yeah, like a handshake. That's a conformational change, and it's what kicks off the next step. It activates the G protein.
So the G protein is like waiting in the wings, ready for action.
Totally. Remember how we talked about GPCRs? Well, they all have this G protein buddy. And when the cannabinoid binds, that shape change we mentioned, it wakes up the G protein. Specifically for CB1 and CB2, we're talking the geniose protein.
Geniose. Okay, got it. So this G protein, what's its move once it's activated?
It needs some fuel. It swaps out this molecule called GDP for GTP. Think of GTP as the energy drink for the G protein.
Swapping a dead battery for a fresh one.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So the G protein's all powered up. What happens next?
It breaks up, splits into subunits, and each of them has their own job to do. It's like a team, breaking off to tackle different parts of a mission.
I can picture these little G protein subunits running around the cell, causing all sorts of chaos. What kind of effects are they triggering?
They interact with enzymes, signaling pathways, the whole shebang, leading to all sorts of cellular responses. It gets complicated fast.
Lay it on me, I'm ready for the complexity. Who are the major players in this cellular drama?
Well, there's CMP, super important signaling molecule, and when THC binds to CB1, it gets inhibited, like the volume gets turned down.
So THC is messing with the cell's internal communication system by messing with CMP levels.
Exactly. And that can have all sorts of knock-on effects. Then you've got PKA, a protein kinase that's controlled by those CMP levels. PKA is involved in like everything, metabolism, gene expression, you name it.
So by affecting KMP, cannabinoids are indirectly pulling the strings on PKA and everything it does.
You got it. Domino effect. And we're not done yet. We have calcium ions too, CAN2+R. Those play a role in all sorts of things, even how neurotransmitters get released.
So cannabinoids can actually affect how brain cells talk to each other just by messing with calcium levels.
Pretty wild, right? And then there's PLC, an enzyme that gets activated by some of those G protein subunits we talked about. PLC goes and chops up a membrane lipid, creating two more important molecules, DAG and IP3.
DAG, IP3. Okay, trying to keep up with all these names. What do these guys do?
They're like messengers activating even more pathways, leading to different effects. Really depends on the cell and what's going on.
Sounds like a whole soap opera going on inside our cells.
And we can't forget the MAPK pathways. These are families of signaling pathways that are all about cell growth, differentiation, stress responses. The main ones are ERK, JNK, and P38.
Okay, all these acronyms, my head's spinning, but I think I'm getting it. These MAPK pathways, they're like the control panels for basic cell stuff. And cannabinoids can mess with those panels through their signaling shenanigans.
You got it. Great way to put it. By influencing all these pathways, cannabinoids can really impact a huge range of how cells function.
It's mind-blowing. It's not just like an on-off switch. It's more like an orchestra, with cannabinoids as the conductor, controlling all the different sections to create this symphony of cellular responses.
I love that analogy, and we're just starting to grasp how intricate this cannabinoid orchestra really is. There's so much more to learn.
I think we've covered a ton already. Do you need a breather?
Yeah.
It's a lot to take in, even for those of us who geek out on this stuff. But before we move on, what really stands out to you about all this cannabinoid signaling complexity?
I mean, it's crazy how many signaling pathways these things can influence. From CAMP, PKA, to those calcium ions, PLC, the MAPK pathways. It's like they're master regulators, fine-tuning all sorts of functions. Super intricate stuff.
Yeah, it's remarkable how one little molecule can set off this huge chain reaction, affecting everything from pain to the immune system. And we're just at the tip of the iceberg.
Totally. It really shows how incredibly complex our bodies are, this delicate balance happening inside every single cell.
Well said. We've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive, but there's much more to explore.
So ready to see how this whole cellular signaling thing actually plays out, in real life.
Absolutely. This is where it gets really exciting. Seeing how these tiny interactions can have such a huge impact on our bodies. Like, let's talk about therapeutic applications. I'm super interested in how cannabinoids could be used for chronic pain.
Perfect example. Remember how we talked about CB1 receptors being all over the brain and spinal cord, those pain processing centers?
Yeah.
Well, that's key here. When THC binds to those receptors, it can actually dampen those pain signals, like turning down the volume on the pain.
So THC is like intercepting those pain messages before they even reach the brain.
Yeah, you can think of it that way. And that's a big reason why medical cannabis is often prescribed for things like chronic pain, multiple sclerosis, where nerve pain is a real issue.
Makes sense. But what about CBD? It doesn't bind as strongly to CB1. So how does it fit into all this?
Good point. CBD, it might not bind as strongly to CB1, but it can still influence those pain pathways. And it might also work by tackling inflammation, which often goes hand in hand with pain.
So CBD is a multitasker. It's going after both the pain signals and the inflammation causing the pain.
Exactly. And that might be why some people find CBD particularly helpful for certain types of pain.
It's amazing how these compounds can be so specific, targeting certain areas of the brain and body. We've been talking a lot about the brain, but we also touched on those CB2 receptors, mostly in the immune system and tissues. What kind of therapeutic potential do we see there?
That's where those anti-inflammatory and immunomodulatory effects of cannabinoids really shine. CBD and CB2 receptors. They could be a game changer for reducing inflammation in things like arthritis or inflammatory bowel disease.
So CBD is essentially calming down the immune response, leading to less inflammation.
That's one of the main ideas, yeah. And it opens up possibilities for developing therapies that specifically target CB2 receptors, without those psychoactive effects from CB1.
That's huge. People could get the benefits without getting high. We've got cannabinoids working in the brain for pain and the immune system for inflammation. What other areas are scientists exploring for potential treatments?
The research is exploding, honestly. We're seeing
Hmm.
potential in a ton of areas. Cancer treatment is one that's getting a lot of attention.
Cancer. Wow. How could cannabinoids even help with that?
It's still early days, but the research is suggesting that some cannabinoids might be able to slow down cancer cell growth and spread. They might even be able to make those cancer cells self-destruct. It's called apoptosis.
Wow, that's intense. Are there any specific types of cancer where this is looking promising?
There's been some positive preclinical research on a bunch of different types, like brain, breast, colon cancer. But, gotta stress this, it's mostly lab studies at this point. We need way more research to really understand how safe and effective they are for people with cancer.
Yeah, I get it. It's important to be careful, especially with cancer treatments.
Absolutely. But the potential is there, for sure. And beyond those direct effects on cancer cells, they might also help manage the nasty side effects of cancer treatments. The nausea and vomiting from chemo.
That would be a huge help for patients going through such tough treatments.
For sure. And there's more. Epilepsy, anxiety, even neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Researchers are looking into all of it.
It's like the list is endless.
It really shows how amazing the endocannabinoid system is. We've only scratched the surface of what these compounds can do for human health.
It's mind-boggling to think about.
Yeah.
But with all this potential, I imagine there are challenges too, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. One of the biggest is the whole regulatory mess around cannabis. Even with all the evidence, it's still illegal in a lot of places, which makes research and developing therapies incredibly hard.
It's frustrating how politics and stigma can slow down scientific progress.
Totally. And another challenge is just how variable cannabis products are. The plants have hundreds of compounds, and the concentrations can change depending on the strain, how it's grown, how it's extracted.
So it's hard to know exactly what you're getting, and that makes it really tough for researchers to design studies.
It's a major obstacle. And it also makes it hard for people to know what they're actually buying. It's like comparing apples and oranges.
That brings up another important point, the risks. We've been talking about the good stuff, but no drug is completely risk-free.
Totally. Cannabinoids are generally pretty safe, but they can interact with other meds, cause side effects, dizziness, dry mouth, anxiety, things like that.
And I imagine the risks are even higher with those synthetic cannabinoids, the lab-made ones that mimic the natural stuff.
You're right, those synthetic ones can be way more potent and a lot less predictable, and they often aren't regulated like natural cannabis, so there's less oversight, less quality control.
That's a bit scary. It sounds like there's a real risk of them ending up on the black market.
It's a serious problem. That's why education and responsible regulation are so important. We need to be clear about the difference between natural cannabinoids and those synthetic alternatives.
I agree. This whole conversation has been eye-opening. We've gone from the cellular level to these big issues of regulation, safety, and public perception.
It's a fascinating field, and it's changing so fast. There's still so much we don't know. But the potential is huge. As we keep learning about the endocannabinoid system and those cannabinoids, we're bound to make even more exciting discoveries.
I'm already looking forward to the next part of our deep dive. But before we wrap up, is there one key takeaway you'd like to leave our listener with?
If I had to pick one, it would be this. The endocannabinoid system, it's this incredibly complex and powerful network that's all about keeping our bodies in balance. And the more we understand it, the better we can use cannabinoids to unlock new ways to treat diseases and improve people's lives. But we gotta do it right. Rigorous research, responsible regulation, open and honest conversations about the benefits and the risks.
That's a great point. It's a call to action for all of us. Scientists, policymakers, healthcare providers, and everyone else. We need to work together to make sure this incredible system reaches its full potential. Stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore the cutting-edge research that's pushing the boundaries of what we know about cannabinoids and what it all means for the future of medicine. Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive. It feels like we've gone on this incredible journey through the microscopic world.
We have. From tiny molecules to huge systems in the body. But, when it comes to cannabinoids, it's like we're still just scratching the surface.
I know, right? So much more to learn. Speaking of learning, after all this talk about potential therapies, what's happening at the cutting edge of cannabinoid research these days? What are the scientists really excited about?
Well, one thing that's really promising is this idea of developing new cannabinoid-based therapies that are more targeted, more precise in what they do. Scientists are working on creating synthetic cannabinoids that act like specialized keys.
Specialized keys.
Yeah, they fit perfectly into very specific receptor locks.
So instead of a key that opens any door, they're designing keys for specific doors.
That's the idea, and that could change everything. Imagine a drug that only targets those CB2 receptors on immune cells to reduce inflammation, but it doesn't touch the brain. No psychoactive effects.
That would be a game changer, especially for chronic pain or inflammatory diseases. Relief without the high, that's amazing.
Exactly. And another area that's getting a lot of attention is the potential of cannabinoids for neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
Yeah, I've heard a little about that. It sounds almost too good to be true. What's the latest thinking there? Could cannabinoids really help with these devastating diseases?
Well, some research suggests that certain cannabinoids might actually protect brain cells, shield them from damage and degeneration. They might even slow down how these diseases progress.
So they're like bodyguards for our brain cells.
Haha, yeah, something like that. There's some evidence they might reduce inflammation in the brain, which we think is a big part of how these diseases develop. And maybe they can even protect those neurons from oxidative stress.
Wow, fighting on multiple fronts to keep our brains healthy.
It seems so, yeah. But gotta be realistic, we still need a lot more research to understand all the benefits and risks.
Right, of course. Finding effective treatments for these complex diseases is a huge challenge. But the idea that cannabinoids could offer some protection, that's definitely exciting.
It is, definitely. And another area that's really taking off is research into how the endocannabinoid system affects mental health, things like anxiety and depression.
I've heard people talk about using cannabis to help with their anxiety or depression. Is there any science behind that?
There's definitely some evidence, yeah. It's still a pretty new area, but studies suggest that the endocannabinoid system plays a role in how we regulate our mood and emotions. And when that system gets out of whack, it might contribute to mental health issues.
So maybe by targeting the endocannabinoid system with cannabinoids, we could help restore balance and ease those symptoms.
That's the hope, but it's complicated. The effects of cannabinoids on mental health can really vary from person to person, It depends on the individual, the specific cannabinoid, the dose, a lot of factors.
Right, so it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It sounds like we need more personalized approaches.
Absolutely. And there's one more area I want to touch on, the role of the endocannabinoid system in gut health.
Gut health, that's an interesting one. I never would have thought of those two things being connected.
Well, it turns out the endocannabinoid system is all over the digestive system. It helps regulate things like how things move through your gut, your appetite, inflammation.
So could cannabinoids actually help with conditions like IBS or inflammatory bowel disease?
That's what some research is showing, yeah. It seems like cannabinoids might be able to reduce gut inflammation, relieve pain, and generally make those conditions less miserable.
It's incredible how this one system, the endocannabinoid system, seems to be involved in so many different aspects of our health.
Right. It really shows how everything in the body is connected, and how important it is to maintain that balance.
This deep dive has been amazing. We started with tiny molecules and ended up exploring these huge systems in the body. It's been a real eye-opener for me.
And this is just the beginning, There's still so much to uncover about the endocannabinoid system and all the possibilities that cannabinoids hold.
I can't wait to see what the future holds for this field. It's clear that there's so much potential here.
The future's bright, for sure. The more we learn about the system, the closer we get to unlocking new ways to treat diseases and improve people's lives.
Well said. Thank you so much for taking us on this incredible deep dive into the world of cannabinoids and how they work.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this journey of discovery. We hope you've learned something new and exciting today. Keep exploring and stay curious. That's it for our deep dive on cannabinoid pharmacology. We'll see you next time.